shadows of Elder Ridge, but no one believed me. I moved back to Elder Ridge because homes keep pulling you back when you think you've finished with them. The first evening, the lane smelled like wet paper and boiled tea, and the houses leaned in close, as if tired people gossiping. There was a hush that had nothing to do with weather, an expectant silence, so solid it pressed against the windows. I told myself I had come for small things, to sort old letters, to clear the attic, to be done with ghosts that might only have been habit. I met the town in stages, the grocer with flour on his cuffs, the old woman who remembered every birth, each of them polite in the way small towns are polite to returning faces. When I tried to tell them about the things that had never fit, how my photograph at home had a stain that wasn't there before, how the cuckoo clock chimed in the afternoon on its own, eyes softened, and the same sentence always arrived, gentle and certain. You're tired. It happens when you come back. The ridge sat like a thought you only remember half-formed. In daylight, the lane resembled any worn path, but at dawn, the fog pooled like a sentient thing and directions felt unreliable. My neighbors avoided certain corners of their yards, children learned to step wide of them, and adults gave reasons, roots, old foundations, but the explanations skated over the same tight absence. I started to notice that everyone changed small details when they spoke of the past, as if memory here were a stone that slowly rolled to a different place. At night, the house rearranged itself in minor, maddening ways. The clock over the mantel would tick with a diplomacy I didn't recognize. It marked hours that didn't exist in the world outside. Shadows pooled at the edges of rooms where pillows had been. Once I sat awake until the kitchen tile lost its color to midnight and heard something that could have been a whisper or the settling of old beams, a soft sequence of syllables that hummed like a remembered name. And then, as if apologizing, the town resumed its sleep. The photograph was the first hard thing. I had found it in the attic, a brittle square, edges browned, a picture of the ridge at some softer, earlier time. But there was a smudge at the corner, an absence that looked too ordered to be age. When I held it up to the window, the smudge arranged itself into suggestion, a darker shape at the hill crest that wasn't there now. I decided at once that the photograph and the shape were connected, and when I said so aloud, the air felt like it had been listening. Under the photograph, I found the key. It was small, a brass thing with no label or obvious lock, half buried beneath the insulation in a box of lace doilies. Cold when I picked it up, it felt at once ordinary and private, like a thing that belonged somewhere else entirely. I kept it in my pocket and began to notice a rhythm. The sound of footsteps upstairs, though the house was empty, a calendar day that blurred into the next, and the faint impression that someone was mapping the rooms by breathing. I told Mrs. Hargreaves about the key and the photograph the day she brought me a pie. She smiled. There was a patient kindness in her face that never settled into belief. Houses keep things, she said, meaning, I think, both the literal and the figurative. I could see her mind slide over what I said, smoothing the corners, as if the world here relied on tidy lines. It was never cruel. It was the opposite, a steady, communal refusal to complicate the stories that kept them comfortable. So I began to record it, mornings, afternoons, the peculiar hours when the clock stuttered. I drew maps of the house and marked the times the darkness seemed to lengthen. There was a pattern, maybe, or an insistence, a slow scribe carving lines across the same places. On the ledger page, a series of scrawled circles curved toward the old well on the hill, as if whatever occupied the low places preferred the hollow. Writing it down kept me from folding into the easy explanations. At gatherings, I watched how photographs shifted. Group pictures that once contained clear faces acquired blurs at the margins, and people's stories altered the moment they told them. A man would speak of a barn that had stood for decades, and the next time it was a field his father tended. These weren't deliberate lies. They were small betrayals of memory, like a garden forgetting where it had been planted. My ledger grew heavy with these mismatches and made me feel like a professional noticing mistakes no one else noticed. I walked to the well because patterns demand a center, and the well felt like one. Its mouth was ringed with moss. Children were warned away from it with half-joking fables. The stone had a patient, centuries-old look, like something that had been doing a job for a very long time and would continue after we were all gone. I leaned over its lip and listened. There was nothing to hear at first. And then, as if the hollow had decided to remember, a soft accumulation of sound, impressions of footsteps, a low chorus of names that weren't mine rose up and then died. Beside the well, I dug and found the talisman half swallowed by earth, a crude wooden carving with initials I recognized from the photograph. The wood smelled of damp roots and something older, a careful domestic smell that made the find intimate and private. When I wrapped it in my scarf to carry home, the world seemed to hold its breath. I wasn't certain whether the object belonged to me, to the town, or to the hill, and that uncertainty amplified the weight of it until it felt unbearable to keep. After that night, the house felt different, not louder exactly, but more attentive. Doors that had sat closed began to exhale small drafts, and the photographs at home started to hold shapes like gathering smoke. I spoke to the postman, the teacher, anyone who would listen, and each time their faces softened and the same patient dismissal arrived. These are old places. Memory softens here. It wasn't antagonism. It was a communal folding of the world into a shape that made evening manageable. The nights grew longer in a way the clock could not account for. Shadows pooled like ink and lapped gently at the floorboards. Once, lying awake, I watched a corner of the ceiling gather darkness until it seemed to breathe on its own, a slow inhalation that stole warmth. I wanted to leave, to put distance between myself and the place that rearranged memory. But I also wanted to make someone take that ledger and see the neat marks, see that there was a pattern, and that pattern mattered. When I finally did show someone, the vicar at length, because his job is to hold other people's certainties, he read my ledger, turned the pages, and then set it down as if it were an interesting curiosity. He sighed and told me about regrets and the consolations of time. He didn't scoff. He didn't need to. He simply offered the world a comforting narrative, and the ledger's stubborn marks seemed to soften under his gaze. I walked home feeling the town's belief retract a little further from me. In the weeks that followed, the town's versions of things became a moving mosaic. A shop that had been one place in my photograph was another in theirs. Names shifted from person to place. Even my own mother, when she came to visit, called the well by a different name and laughed when I corrected her, as if correcting was an impertinence. It was as if Elder Ridge preferred to organize itself around consensus, smoothing inconvenient edges until the memory fit the town's tidy horizon. I left a note in the post office that said simply, "Remember the well. Keep the key. Look at the photograph." It was the sort of plea that asked for attention without demanding belief. I imagined someone finding it, setting it down, feeling the prick of unease, and then choosing to act. When I passed the postbox later, the note was gone. The clerk had no recollection of it. He smiled as if I were still joking. No one believed me, and the town carried on, everything rearranged into a landscape that favored comfort over small, insinuating truths. The last night I spent at Elder Ridge, the air was so still that distant lights looked like deliberate markers. I stood by the well, the talisman warm in my palm from being close to my skin all day, and listened to the slope of the hill. For a moment, I felt entirely seen, reckoned with by something older than gossip. Then the earth exhaled, and the sound was a closing of pages. I walked away, convinced that I had done all I could. I left with a bruise of certainty that no one would accept my map of the dark. Weeks later, a photograph appeared in a regional paper. A crowd at the ridge, smiling around a ribbon, celebrating a festival I had no memory of attending. At the bottom, a caption named a person I didn't know, and beneath that, small, nearly invisible, was the line, "Local returns after time away." I realized then that the ridge preferred stories that folded neatly, and those who insisted otherwise simply became a loose thread. No one believed me. Sometimes, in the quiet that follows a thought, that refusal lodges like a splinter and aches forever.